Hi there. In the last tutorial lecture, we looked at creating our first iteration of the post class, and we just added the author attribute to that. And then when we went to our actual admin area, we were able to add a post with just the author. So that is great. But what if we want to have more than just an author? Well, let's have a look at that now. So I think that some other fields that we should have, which would be interesting, should be title, and then let's call the models a library as before, and then here we can define what type of attribute we want it to be, and this will be mapped to a very specific type of field in the database. So we want to map this to a varchar field in the database, which is a char field here, and this tells Django that we want it, when we make the migration, that we want it to be a char field or a character field. And I'm going to pass the max length value into this as well, and what that's going to do is that's obviously going to set a max length to this title, so the title can never be longer than 150 characters. Something else that I also want to set to true is null. Now this is probably not the greatest idea for this point, but for some reason, if we want our title field to possibly be null, then we can set this to true, which means that we don't have to set our title field. Okay, cool. Then the next field that I want to set is the text field, and I want the text field to be equal to something very similar to the char field, except it is actually a special type of field called text. And this is slightly different to the char field and used in a slightly different way. Text fields are usually used when you have long descriptions and long pieces of text where you have a very high number of characters. Then you can use a text field. A char field is usually when it is a bit shorter and you want to limit it for the sake of space, and you know it's not really going to get that big. Cool. So that is good enough for us. Let's also set the null here equal to true, so that we know that it can be something that is empty. Then the last thing that I want to add for now is the created date. Now this is something that we won't be able to manually set when we create our post, because all it's going to do is it's just going to pull in the date time from when it is actually saved initially, and that is a special type of field again, which is a date time field, and this is specific to how it is mapped to the database once again. And now we can make use of our lovely time zone function. So we can push this default value, which we can pull in here. So any of these other ones can also have a default value, and we want the default value to be timezone.now. And what this will do is it will set the default time zone to now. So what I want to do now, I mean, there's a couple of other things that we could do to improve this, but I just want to run the migrations on this particular model and see what happens. So let's first close down our server and let's run our make migrations for our blog. Fantastic. So we've added these 3 fields to our blog, and we are going to now actually make that migration as we've done before, and it successfully made our migration. So what you'll notice now as well is if we go to our migrations folder, there's a new migration that is created, and it has a dependency on our first one. So if somebody now had to set this project up, or we had to set this project up on a different environment, so on a development server, on a different development server, on a production server, we could just run this migration, and it would run through all of our migrations and just add the relevant database fields and tables and columns as it needs to. So that is really convenient for us. So now we've run that, let's just run our server again. Run server, no errors, and let's refresh this posts and see what happens when you add a new post. Great! Now we have a title, a text field, and a created date. This is not really something that we want to be able to change, but we can deal with that later if we need to. So now, if we set the admin and we set the title to Hello World, and this is some text, we can actually just hit save here. It's very happy to do that, and now we have our post being saved. Now, something that I don't really like about this, which I feel that we need to sort out now, is that post object is really not the greatest way to define this. I would rather have the title being pulled in, so I would rather have it say hello world then, as opposed to post object. This is the flexibility that Django gives you. It allows you to set these various things, but if you don't set it, it more than likely is going to default to something quite ugly looking. So let's go back to our model, and what we need to do now is we need to create something called a toString function. And what a toString function means is when we call our object, so obviously it's being called here, what is going to be returned? So in this case, the post object is going to be returned. I would much rather return the post title as opposed to the whole object, because it just looks a lot cleaner. So let's create a new method in our function. And the way that we create this toString method is double underscore, the same way that we did our double underscore init for our constructor method in earlier lectures. We go double underscore and then str for string, and then open close brackets, colon, and then because we're dealing with the instance of a class, we have to pass the self variable in, and then by default, and this is actually coming from the default model class, this toString function, we want to now create our own variation. So instead of just returning self as the default function would look, we want to return self.title, and this is now going to return the title. So hopefully, if we, let me just refresh the server. Sometimes it is good to just reload your server to make sure everything is working as it should. And you refresh this, you can now see that we are pulling in the title here as opposed to just self. So if we change this back to self, I have no doubt that this is going to look terrible. Yep, and it is even giving us an error. So yeah, it's saying that we are returning something that is a non-string. So I mean, if we wanted to change this to the text, for example, we could very well do that. And this is some text. So I think I'm going to keep it to the title for now, and then we are going to expand on this a little bit and have a look at how we can bring this into the front end in our next lecture.